The motel sign flickered above them like it was too tired to keep shining. Russell and Elaine thought their children had brought them there for a quiet 3-day rest. But by morning, the car was gone, the phones were silent, and every bank card they had stopped working. All they had left was one small bag, an old jacket, and a woman at the front desk who noticed too much to look away. Then Elaine found a bank envelope hidden in the lining of Russell's coat. It did not just explain why they were abandoned, it revealed who had been quietly taking control of their lives. If this story touches you, tell us where you're watching from. Leave your thoughts below, and please like and subscribe to help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep writing more meaningful stories. The first snow had not stayed on the ground yet, but it had left its warning. A thin white crust clung to the shaded side of the Hartman driveway, where the pines blocked the afternoon sun. Beyond the porch, the lake lay dark and still, with a skin of silver light stretched across it like old glass. Wesley Hartman stood by the kitchen window with a carving knife in his hand, watching the water instead of the turkey. At 67, Wesley had the kind of stillness people mistook for slowness. His shoulders had narrowed some over the years, and his hair had gone from iron gray to almost white at the temples, but his hands were still steady. They were square, weathered hands, crossed with small, pale scars from 4 decades of bridge work, road crews, busted knuckles, and winter repairs no one else wanted to do. Behind him, his wife Linda moved around the kitchen with the careful patience of someone who had hosted the same holiday so many times she no longer needed recipes. She hummed under her breath, not loudly enough to call it a song, just enough to keep the room from feeling empty. "Wes," she said, "you're going to carve the window if you keep staring like that." He looked down at the knife and smiled a little. "I was checking the ice line. There isn't any ice yet." "There will be." Linda gave him the same look she had been giving him since 1979, half amusement, half surrender. She had soft gray hair pinned loosely at the back of her head, and a face that had learned how to show kindness without giving away everything she felt. People often thought Linda was the gentler one between them. Wesley knew better. Linda could hold a silence longer than any judge in the county. The house smelled of roasted turkey, sage dressing, coffee, and the pumpkin pie cooling near the pantry door. It was not a large house, but it had been built slowly, one repair at a time, until it became less like a structure and more like a record of their marriage. Wesley had replaced the porch boards after the flood of '94. He had built the back steps when Linda's mother started having trouble with her knees. He had set the stone path down to the lake himself, hauling each flat rock in a wheelbarrow after work, one evening at a time. Nothing about the place had come easily. That was why he loved it. By 5 o'clock, the headlights appeared between the trees. First came Meredith. She drove a dark SUV that looked too clean for the road leading to the Hartman place. When she stepped out, she paused before closing the door, as if checking the hem of her coat for dirt. Meredith Cole was 52, tall, neat, and polished in a way that made every room feel slightly underprepared for her. She worked in finance in Boise and had inherited Linda's eyes, though she used them differently. Linda's eyes softened a room. Meredith's measured it. Her husband had stopped coming to Thanksgiving years ago, claiming work, flights, deadlines. Wesley had never pressed the matter. Meredith came in carrying a bottle of wine and a bakery box. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said, kissing Linda's cheek first, then Wesley's. Her perfume briefly covered the smell of turkey. "You didn't have to bring anything," Linda said. "I know, I wanted to." Wesley took her coat. "Roads okay?" "Fine," Meredith said. "A little rough near the county turnoff. You really should let someone grade that stretch. I've been letting someone say that for 20 years. She gave a polite laugh, but it did not land. Ethan arrived 15 minutes later. Wesley heard his son's truck before he saw it. The engine had a low, uneven growl, the sound of a vehicle driven hard and maintained late. Ethan Hartman was 54, broad through the chest like his father had been at that age, though his face had lost some of its old color. He had deep creases beside his mouth and a habit of rubbing his thumb along the side of his wedding ring when he was thinking. He came in with a paper bag of rolls and a tired smile. "Sorry we're late." "We?" Linda asked. Ethan glanced back toward the porch. A man stepped in behind him. He was maybe in his late 50s, with silver hair combed precisely back, a navy overcoat, and shoes too polished for a lakeside driveway in November. He carried no dish, no flowers, no bottle, only a leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. "Mom, Dad," Ethan said a little too quickly. "This is Grant Voss. He's been helping me look at some family planning options." Grant smiled as though he had practiced making the expression seem humble. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartman, thank you for allowing me to intrude on a family holiday." Wesley wiped his right hand on a dish towel before offering it. "Didn't know we were allowing that." For 1 second, the room went still. Then Grant laughed softly, as if Wesley had made a joke. Linda stepped in with the grace of a woman who knew how to keep a table from cracking before dinner. "Well, you're here now. Let me take your coat." Grant handed it over. "Very kind of you." Wesley watched him look around the entryway. Not obviously, not rudely, but thoroughly. The old beam above the living room opening, the stone fireplace, the framed survey map from 1988, the window facing the lake. A man did not look at a home like that unless he was pricing it. Dinner began with the usual things. Linda asked Meredith about work. Meredith said the year had been demanding, which was her way of saying she did not want to explain. Ethan asked about the old tractor, though he had not asked in years. Wesley said it still started better than most people. Everyone smiled. Grant complimented the view. "It's rare," he said, looking past the dining room window toward the darkening lake. "Land like this, still intact." Linda glanced at Wesley. "It's not intact by accident," Wesley said. "No, I imagine not." Grant lifted his glass slightly. "That kind of stewardship takes vision." The word sounded harmless enough. Stewardship. Vision. Planning. Wesley had heard men use good words before while standing over bad blueprints. They ate. For a while, the room almost became what it used to be. The clink of forks. The low sound of wind moving through the pine branches. Linda reminding Ethan he always took too much gravy. Meredith smiling at an old story about Wesley backing a county truck into a ditch the week before Christmas and spending 6 hours pulling it out with a borrowed winch. But the warmth never fully settled. It hovered over the table like steam from the serving dishes, then disappeared. Halfway through dinner, Meredith began asking questions about the stairs. "Do you still go down to the dock every morning?" "Most mornings," Wesley said. "Even when it's icy?" "When it's icy, I walk slower." "That's not really the point, Dad." Linda set her fork down carefully. Ethan leaned back. "Meredith's not wrong. This place is a lot to keep up with." Wesley carved a small piece of turkey with the side of his fork. "It's always been a lot to keep up with." "You were younger then," Meredith said. There it was. Not cruel, not loud, but placed on the table as plainly as the salt. "You were younger then." Wesley looked at his daughter. He remembered her at 30, furious because he would not lend her money for a business idea he did not understand. He remembered her at 19, standing by the mailbox with a college acceptance letter in both hands, trying not to cry before he did. He remembered carrying her on his shoulders across this very yard, when the spring mud swallowed her little boots. But he did not say any of that. Age taught a man which memories were gifts and which were weapons. Ethan cleared his throat. "Dad, nobody's saying you can't handle things today. We're talking about 5 years from now." 10. Linda gave a quiet laugh with no humor in it. "That's generous." "Mom," Meredith said, softening her voice, "please don't make this into something ugly. We're trying to be responsible." That was when Wesley noticed the portfolio. Grant had placed it beside his chair sometime after the blessing and before the pie. It sat upright against the leg of the dining table, black leather catching the light. Not a guest's bag, a salesman's bag. Linda rose to bring out dessert. Wesley started to stand, but she touched his shoulder as she passed behind him. "I've got it." Her hand stayed there half a second longer than usual. That small pressure did something to him. It was not fear. Not exactly. It was the old language of marriage. The kind spoken without words, after decades of sick nights, bad news, unpaid bills, and children sleeping in rooms just down the hall. Linda had felt the turn in the room too. When she returned with the pumpkin pie, nobody reached for it at first. Ethan looked at Meredith. Meredith looked at Grant. Grant opened the portfolio. The sound of the zipper seemed louder than it should have been. "Mr. Hartman," Grant said, sliding a stack of papers onto the table. "I know holidays are not ideal for practical matters, but your children felt it would be better to discuss this in person, together, rather than through a series of stressful phone calls." Wesley looked at Ethan. His son's eyes were fixed on the papers. "Is that what you felt?" Wesley asked. Ethan rubbed his thumb along his wedding ring. "I felt we needed to start somewhere." Meredith leaned forward. "Dad, Mom, this is not a sale contract. Nobody is forcing anything tonight. It's just preliminary authorization, a title review, land use assessment, valuation options. That's all." "Theirs in 60. Linda sat very still. "Valuation for what?" she asked. "For planning," Meredith said. "For care, for liquidity, for whatever comes next." Whatever comes next. Wesley had spent his life reading documents nobody else wanted to read. Road easements, drainage reports, bridge inspections, contractor claims. He had learned that the most dangerous words in any document were the ones that sounded harmless because they had room to hide something. Preliminary, option, planning, authorization. He pulled the stack closer. Grant turned the first few pages for him, too eager to guide the pace. Wesley stopped him with one look. "I can read." Grant withdrew his hand. "Of course." The first page was plain enough. Names, property description, parcel numbers, county references. The second page mentioned title review. The third discussed access for surveying. The fourth contained language about future transfer considerations, written in the foggy style of people who were paid by the hour to make simple things difficult. Wesley kept reading. The room grew quiet around him. He could hear Linda's breathing beside him. He could hear Ethan shift in his chair. He could hear the old refrigerator hum in the kitchen and the wind tapping one bare branch against the siding outside. Then he reached the final page. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. There, beneath a block of consent language, was his name. Wesley A. Hartman. Not typed as a label. Not printed as a party name. Signed. A digital signature, neat and clean, placed above the date line like a fact that had already happened. Wesley stared at it. His fingers did not move. He had signed his name thousands of times in his life. On payroll sheets. On inspection reports. On mortgage papers. On birthday cards. On the back of checks when money was tight and hope was thinner than it should have been. His signature had changed over the years. It had grown less sharp after arthritis settled into his knuckles. The W used to rise like the first truss of a bridge. Now it leaned a little, the way old men leaned into wind. This one was too smooth, too young, too obedient. Linda looked at him, waiting. Meredith began speaking, but Wesley did not hear the first few words. Something inside him had gone very calm. That was the strange thing about betrayal. People imagined it arrived like fire. Hot, loud, consuming. But sometimes it came like cold water under a door. Silent at first. Then suddenly, everywhere. He looked at Ethan. His son's face had tightened, not with surprise, with dread. Wesley placed the final page back on the stack and aligned the edges with slow care. Once. Twice. Until every corner matched. Then he closed the folder. Nobody spoke. The turkey had gone cold. The pie sat untouched. Outside, the lake had disappeared into the dark, leaving only the reflection of the dining room window. 5 adults sitting beneath warm lights, pretending the house around them had not just shifted. Grant smiled faintly. "If you have questions, Mr. Hartman, I'd be happy to walk you through any section." Wesley rested one hand on top of the folder. "I do have questions." Ethan swallowed. Meredith sat straighter. But Wesley did not ask them. Not there. Not with Linda beside him, and a stranger at his table and his children watching him like a man they hoped would be too tired to understand what had been placed in front of him. He pushed the folder back toward the center of the table. "Leave it here," he said. Grant blinked. "Certainly. Though some of the timing, leave it here." The second time, There was no room left inside the words. Grant nodded. Wesley turned to Linda. "Pie looks good." Linda looked at him for a long moment. Then, with a steadiness that made him love her more painfully than he could bear, she picked up the knife and cut the first slice. Nobody enjoyed dessert. They ate because stopping would have admitted too much. Later, after coats were gathered and polite goodbyes were spoken in voices too careful to be natural, Wesley stood on the porch and watched taillights move down the long driveway. Meredith's SUV first, Ethan's truck behind it, Grant's rental last, red lights bending between the pines until the trees swallowed them. Linda came to stand beside him. The cold air made her breath visible. "Wes?" she said quietly. "What did you see?" He did not answer right away. The house behind them glowed warm through the windows. Their house. Their table. Their dishes still waiting in the sink. The old survey map still hanging in the hall. Everything familiar. Everything suddenly less safe. Finally, Wesley said, "My name." Linda looked at him. "Where?" "On a page I never signed." She closed her eyes. For a moment, she looked smaller than she had that morning. Not weaker, just struck by something that had landed deeper than either of them wanted to admit. Wesley reached for her hand. It was cold. He held it anyway. They went back inside without speaking. Linda began clearing the table because grief, for women like her, often needed something to do with its hands. Wesley helped until she told him to stop hovering. Near midnight, after the kitchen was clean and Linda had gone upstairs, Wesley returned to his office. The room smelled of paper, dust, and old cedar. On the wall above the desk hung a framed photograph from 1986. Wesley standing beside a half-finished county bridge, one boot on a steel beam, face sunburned, eyes narrowed against the light. Ethan had once loved that photograph. As a boy, he used to say his father looked like someone who could build a road through anything. Wesley sat down. The folder lay in front of him. He did not open it yet. Instead, he took a yellow legal pad from the drawer and wrote the date at the top. Then he wrote 4 words beneath it. Thanksgiving dinner. False signature. His hand paused over the paper. Downstairs, the old house settled in the cold, giving off the small wooden sighs he had known for nearly 40 years. Wesley listened. Then, very slowly, he turned the lock on the office door. Wesley did not sleep much that night. He lay beside Linda in the dark and listened to the old house speak in its winter language. A pop in the wall when the heat came on. A soft creak from the hallway floorboards. Wind pressing against the north windows, then letting go. For nearly 40 years, those sounds had comforted him. They had meant the house was alive around them. Settling. Breathing. Holding. That night, they sounded like witnesses. Linda turned once, her back toward him, and he knew from the way she held her shoulders that she was awake too. Neither of them said anything. Words would have made the thing real before morning, and morning was already waiting close enough. At 6:30, Wesley got out of bed. The lake was still black beyond the window. The sky over the pines had begun to thin from dark blue into gray. He dressed quietly in jeans, thermal shirt, and the old canvas jacket Linda kept threatening to throw away. Downstairs, the folder from Thanksgiving dinner sat on his desk where he had left it. He did not open it. Not yet. Instead, he made coffee. By the time Linda came down, wrapped in her robe, he had 2 mugs on the kitchen table and a legal pad beside his elbow. "You were up early," she said. "I was up late." She sat across from him. Her face looked pale in the morning light, but not fragile. Linda had never been fragile. She was the kind of woman who could sit beside a hospital bed for 3 days, then come home and remember to pay the electric bill. "Are we going to talk about it?" she asked. Wesley looked at the steam rising from his coffee. "We're going to understand it first." That sounds like something you'd say before crawling under a bridge in February. Under a bridge, at least you know what's holding the weight. Linda wrapped both hands around her mug. For a while, they sat quietly. There was no anger in the kitchen yet. Anger would come later, maybe. What filled the room now was something heavier and more careful, the feeling of 2 people trying to step around broken glass in a house they had thought was safe. Wesley finally opened the folder. The papers looked less dramatic in daylight. That bothered him. At midnight, the false signature had seemed like a crime written in black ink. In the morning, it looked like business. Clean margins, neutral headings, legal phrases arranged to make discomfort seem unreasonable. Linda leaned forward but did not touch the pages. "That's the one?" she asked. Wesley turned to the final page and pointed. Her eyes moved across the block of text, then dropped to his name. He saw the moment she understood. Her mouth tightened, not in surprise, but in injury. "It doesn't even look like yours," she said. "No. Could it have come from something old? Something scanned? That's what I'm going to find out." A flash of color moved outside the kitchen window. Wesley looked up. At first he thought it was a hunter's vest between the trees. Then the shape moved again, bright orange against the dull snow, followed by another figure carrying a tripod. He stood. Linda turned. "What is it?" Wesley did not answer. He walked to the back door, opened it, and stepped onto the porch without putting on his gloves. The cold struck his face clean and hard. Near the lower pasture, just above the slope that led toward the lake, two men in reflective jackets were setting up surveying equipment. One had a clipboard tucked under his arm. The other was driving a thin wooden stake into the frozen ground with a small mallet. A strip of orange flagging snapped in the wind. For several seconds, Wesley simply watched. He had watched survey crews all his life. He knew their rhythm, the way one man checked sightlines while another marked points, the way they moved with the quiet confidence of people who believed they had permission to be where they stood. That was what angered him first. Not the stake, not the tripod, the confidence. Wesley stepped off the porch and walked across the yard. The snow was shallow, but the ground beneath it was hard. Each step made a faint crunch. The man with the mallet saw him coming and stopped mid-swing. "Morning," Wesley said. The man with the clipboard turned. He was young, maybe 35, with a reddish beard and a knit cap pulled low. He looked uncomfortable before Wesley said another word, which told Wesley he knew this might not be simple. "Morning, sir," the man said. "You lost?" The bearded man glanced at the tripod, then back at Wesley. "No, sir. We're with Northline Survey." "I didn't ask who you were with." The younger man holding the mallet shifted his weight. The bearded man cleared his throat. "We were contracted to conduct preliminary boundary and access verification." "By whom?" "I'd have to check the work order." "Check it." The man looked at his clipboard, though Wesley suspected he already knew the name. "Voss Development Advisory," he said. Wesley held out his hand. The man hesitated, then passed him the top sheet. The work order listed parcel numbers Wesley knew by memory. It referenced shoreline access, road expansion feasibility, slope grade, and preliminary residential recreational development review. Residential recreational, a clean term for cutting a place into pieces. "You have written permission from the owner?" Wesley asked. The bearded man tapped the paper. "The file says authorization was provided electronically." Wesley looked at the orange stake in the ground. It stood where Linda planted lupine every spring. He bent down, gripped the stake, and pulled it out of the soil. The younger man made a small sound. "Sir, we need those markers to—" Wesley turned and handed the stake to him. "You can carry this one back to your truck." The man took it, uncertain what to do with his hands. Wesley looked at the bearded surveyor. "No one surveys my land without my permission." The man's face reddened. "Mr. Hartman, we don't want any trouble. We just get assigned sites. That's all." "I know." That was why Wesley did not shout. These two men were not the ones who had placed his signature on a page. They were just the first physical proof that the page had begun to move through the world. He handed the work order back. "Pack up. We'll have to report that access was denied." "You do that." The men exchanged a glance, then began folding the tripod. Wesley remained standing there until both of them walked back toward their truck. He watched the vehicle reverse carefully up the drive, then disappear between the pines. Only after the sound of the engine faded did he look down. The small hole left by the stake was dark against the snow. It should have been nothing. A little puncture in frozen ground. But Wesley felt it in his chest, like something had been driven through the skin of his life. Linda was waiting on the porch when he returned. "Surveyors?" she asked. He nodded. Her face changed in a way that hurt him more than if she had cried. "They already started," she said. "Yes. But you didn't sign." "No." The sentence sat between them with nowhere to go. Inside, the phone was ringing. Linda went in first. Wesley followed slowly, wiping his boots on the mat. She picked up the kitchen phone with the cautious tone people use after a night of bad news. "Hello?" Wesley watched her listen, her brows pulled together. "No," she said. "This is Linda Hartman. I don't know anything about that." A pause. "What bridge loan?" Wesley lifted his eyes. Linda looked at him. Her voice stayed polite, but the color drained from her face. "No. We have not authorized any application." "No, my husband is here. Please don't process anything until we speak with someone in writing." She hung up slowly. "That was Western Valley Bank," she said. Wesley did not move. "They said there was an inquiry attached to a possible short-term financing structure. Something about liquidity during a property transition." "Property transition," Wesley repeated. Linda pressed one hand against the counter. "That man sat at our table." Wesley knew she did not mean the banker. The morning began breaking apart after that. At 11, an email arrived from their insurance agent. A man named Paul, who had handled their policies for 20 years and still sent Christmas cards with photographs of his hunting dogs. The message was careful, apologetic, and full of language Paul had probably copied from a corporate template. The insurer had received notice of possible change in land use and increased public access exposure. The liability policy would need review. Additional underwriting might be required. Coverage terms could change. Wesley read the email twice, then printed it. He placed it beside the survey work order, the folder from Grant Voss, and the notes he had made before dawn. Linda stood behind his chair. "How does insurance know before we do?" she asked. "Because someone wanted them to." Ethan called at noon. Wesley let it ring 3 times before answering. "Dad," Ethan said, breathless, like he had been waiting for the call and still wasn't ready when it came. "I heard there was an issue with the survey crew." "You heard fast. They contacted Grant. He contacted me." "Efficient chain." Ethan exhaled. "Dad, listen. Nobody is trying to pull anything over on you. They were just checking access. That's normal at this stage." "What stage is that?" "A pause. The stage where we gather information. You put my signature on a consent form. I didn't put anything." "Then who did?" Another pause. Longer this time. Ethan's voice dropped. "It was an electronic authorization. Grant said it was procedural. He said it didn't bind you to a sale. I didn't ask what Grant said." "Dad." "I asked who authorized my name." Ethan went silent. Wesley could hear something in the background. Traffic, maybe, or machinery. A life continuing on the other end of the line as if this were just a disagreement about paperwork. Finally, Ethan said, "We're trying to protect you and Mom." Wesley closed his eyes. There it was again. The soft cover laid over a hard thing. Protect. Help. Plan. From what? Wesley asked. From waiting too long. The answer was so honest and so ugly that Wesley almost preferred a lie. He opened his eyes and looked across the room at Linda, who stood by the window with her arms folded tightly over her chest. "Don't send anyone else to my property," Wesley said. "Dad, please don't make this harder." "You already did." He ended the call. For the first time that day, Linda sat down. Not because she was weak, because the room had become too full. Wesley walked to the window. Outside, the yard looked unchanged except for the faint tracks where the surveyors had crossed the snow. The lake was still there. The pines were still there. The house stood warm behind him, but something essential had shifted. A home could be intact and still no longer feel private. By mid-afternoon, Meredith sent a long text message. Wesley did not read all of it. Linda did. Then laid the phone face down on the table. "She says we're being emotional." Wesley gave a short laugh. "That's rich. She says refusing to cooperate will only reduce our options." "Our options." Linda's mouth trembled once, then steadied. "She wrote that we need to stop treating this place like a memory and start treating it like an asset." Wesley turned from the window. He had no answer for that. Not because he agreed, but because a person who could write such a sentence about her parents' home had already crossed a distance he did not know how to measure. Near 4 o'clock, Wesley went upstairs and pulled 2 canvas duffel bags from the closet. Linda found him folding shirts. She stood in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "We're leaving for a few days." Her face tightened. "Leaving? Not surrendering." "I didn't say surrendering. You were thinking it." She looked away. He set a folded flannel shirt into the bag. "If we stay here tonight, Ethan will come over. Or Meredith will call again. Or Grant will send some revised explanation for a thing that should never have happened. We'll spend our energy defending ourselves in our own kitchen." Linda came into the room slowly. "This is our home." "I know. Then why do we have to be the ones to go?" That question struck harder than anger would have. Wesley sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time that day, he looked tired. "Because I need to think without hearing their voices in every room." Linda's eyes filled, but she did not let the tears fall. Wesley reached for her hand. "A few days. Somewhere quiet. I'll take the old files. We'll figure out what they started and how far it's gone." She looked around the bedroom. The quilt folded at the foot of the bed. The photograph of them at Glacier National Park. The cedar chest where she kept letters her mother had written in blue ink. None of it looked valuable in the way Meredith meant the word. That was exactly why it mattered. "Where would we go?" Linda asked. "Frank's." Her expression changed, just slightly. Frank Delaney had been part of Wesley's life so long that Linda sometimes called him the other bad idea from Wesley's construction years. He had worked with Wesley on county bridge projects in the 80s and 90s. A wiry man with a crooked nose, a dry sense of humor, and the stubborn loyalty of someone who did not need to say he cared because he showed up with tools. "He still has that old mill?" Linda asked. "Half of it. Does the heater work?" "Depends what you mean by work." For the first time since morning, Linda almost smiled. They packed lightly but not carelessly. Wesley took clothes, medication, the folder Grant had left, the printed insurance email, the banknotes, and 3 banker's boxes of old property files from the office closet. Linda packed sweaters, toiletries, her address book, and the small metal recipe box that had belonged to her mother. Wesley noticed but did not comment. Everyone chose strange things when leaving home without knowing what the leaving meant. Before dusk, he walked through the house once. Not dramatically, not as a farewell. He checked the back door lock, turned down the thermostat, closed the curtains in the guest room, paused by the dining table where the shine from the overhead light still fell across the wood. The folder had been there less than 24 hours ago. He could still see Grant's manicured hand sliding the papers forward. Ethan's eyes lowered. Meredith's voice sang responsible, as if the word could absolve anything. Linda waited by the front door with her coat on. "You ready?" she asked. "No." She nodded. "Me neither." They stepped outside together. The cold had sharpened. Their breath showed white in the air. Wesley loaded the boxes into the back of the pickup and covered them with an old tarp. Linda locked the front door, then stood for a moment with the key in her hand. She had locked that door thousands of times. Grocery trips, church suppers, doctor appointments, weekend drives, ordinary departures. This one took longer. Finally, she turned the key and slipped it into her purse. As Wesley backed the truck down the drive, both of them looked straight ahead. Neither wanted to watch the house shrink behind them. The road to Frank's place ran west through timber and open pasture, then dipped toward an old logging route where the pavement gave up pretending and turned to gravel. By the time they reached the mill, the sky had gone dark. A yellow light burned above the office door. Frank Delaney opened it before Wesley knocked. He was thinner than he used to be, all elbows and angles under a wool shirt, with white hair sticking out from beneath a battered cap. His beard had gone uneven in retirement, and his left shoulder sat lower than his right from an old job site injury he refused to discuss. But his eyes were the same, pale, sharp, and unwilling to waste words. He looked at Wesley, then at Linda, then at the boxes in the truck. "Well," Frank said, "that doesn't look like a social call." Wesley tried to answer, but for a second no words came. Frank stepped aside. "Come in before the cold starts charging rent." The old mill office smelled of sawdust, iron, and coffee that had been reheated too many times. A wood stove clicked in the corner. On one wall hung rusted saw blades and framed photographs of bridges Wesley recognized from younger, harder years. Frank led them through a side door into a small room behind the office. It had a narrow bed, a sagging couch, a metal desk, and a window looking out at stacked lumber under tin roofing. It was plain, but warm. "I can clear more space tomorrow," Frank said. "Desk works, lamp works, bathroom's ugly but loyal." Linda set her bag down. "Thank you, Frank." He looked uncomfortable with gratitude. "Don't thank me until you've seen the bathroom." Wesley carried in the first box of files and placed it on the metal desk. Then the second, then the third. The sound of cardboard against steel seemed final in a way he had not expected. Linda stood near the little window, looking out at the dark shapes of lumber and machinery. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass. For most of the day, she had held herself together with tasks: coffee, phone calls, packing, locking the door. Now there was nothing left to do. Her shoulders began to shake. Wesley crossed the room, but she lifted one hand. "Just a minute," she whispered. So he stopped. He let her have the dignity of not being comforted before she was ready. Frank disappeared without a word and came back with 3 mugs of coffee. He set one on the desk for Wesley, one on the windowsill near Linda, and kept one for himself. No one spoke for a long while. Outside, wind moved through the stacked lumber with a low, hollow sound. Wesley looked at the boxes. For the first time since he had seen his name on that page, he understood the size of what lay ahead. Not the legal part, not the documents. He knew how to read paper. The hard part would be reading his children. Frank leaned against the doorframe. "You want to tell me what happened?" Wesley rested one hand on the top box. "Tomorrow," he said. Frank nodded once. "Then tonight you sleep." Linda turned from the window. Her face was wet, but calm. Wesley looked at her and knew she had left more than a house behind. She had left the last version of their family, in which this still might have been a misunderstanding. He pulled out the chair at the metal desk and sat down. The room was small. The light was bad. The coffee was bitter, but for the first time all day, no one was trying to make him sign anything. Wesley took the folder from the top of the first box and laid it flat under the lamp. He did not open it yet. He only placed his palm over it, as if holding something dangerous still. By morning, the mill office looked less like a spare room and more like a field station after a storm. Wesley had spread papers across the metal desk, the sagging couch, and half the floor. Old deed copies, tax maps, insurance statements, survey plats, county notices, envelopes with dates written in Linda's careful handwriting, faded carbon copies from years when people still trusted paper more than passwords. Frank had cleared a second table by pushing aside a box of rusted hinges and a coffee can full of bent nails. He said nothing about the mess. He only set a fresh pot of coffee on the hot plate and left a roll of masking tape beside the lamp, as though any decent investigation required both caffeine and something to hold corners down. Linda sat near the window with a wool blanket around her shoulders, sorting papers by year. She had slept badly. Wesley could see it in the way she moved more slowly than usual, pausing over envelopes as if each one might carry another insult from yesterday. But she had not withdrawn. That mattered to him. Linda's quiet had changed overnight. It was no longer shock. It had become attention. Wesley respected attention. It was how bridges stayed standing. "Property taxes, 2018 through 2023, she said, sliding a stack toward him. "Put them with county records." "That pile? No, that's insurance." She looked at the 2 piles, then at him. "Wes, there are 7 piles. 8. That does not make me feel better." He almost smiled. The room smelled of hot dust, black coffee, and old cardboard. Outside, the mill yard was still. The lumber stacks sat beneath their tin roofs in long sleeping rows. Every now and then, the wind moved through a gap in the siding and made the walls whisper. Frank came in just after 9, carrying a small space heater under one arm. "You two look like you're building a courthouse out of paper." Wesley did not look up. "Might need one." Frank set the heater near Linda's feet. That was not an invitation to be clever. Linda gave him a tired smile. "Thank you, Frank." He shrugged, embarrassed by kindness the way some men were embarrassed by compliments. "Don't burn the place down. It's ugly, but it's mine." After he left, Wesley opened the folder Grant Voss had brought to Thanksgiving dinner and began comparing it against his own property records. At first, nothing looked obviously wrong. That annoyed him more than if he had found a glaring mistake. Bad work was easy to fight. Careful work required patience. The parcel numbers matched. The legal description matched the county plat. The names were correct. The boundary references were accurate enough. Whoever had prepared the packet had not been sloppy. That meant they had been selective. By 10:30, Wesley had a yellow legal pad full of notes and a growing ache behind his eyes. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, then pulled an older file from one of the banker's boxes. The label was written in his own hand. Hartman Lake Easement 2009. Linda noticed him pause. "Is that the conservation file?" "Should be." She came to stand beside him. The folder was thicker than he remembered. Inside were copies of the agreement he and Linda had signed with the Bitterroot Watershed Conservancy 15 years earlier, after the spring flood that nearly washed out the county road and sent half the lower pasture underwater. Wesley remembered that year too well. He remembered standing in mud up to his shins. Watching water move across land most people thought was just pretty scenery. He had understood then what some people never did. Land had work to do. The reeds along the lake filtered runoff. The low meadow held floodwater. The old cottonwoods gripped soil that would otherwise slide toward the road. A developer had once called it underused acreage. Wesley had called it the reason 3 homes downhill did not flood. The conservation easement had been their answer. They kept ownership of the land, but certain uses were restricted permanently. No large-scale residential development, no resort structures, no commercial marina, no road expansion beyond agreed access limits. Linda touched the edge of the old agreement. "I remember signing that," she said. "You hated the lawyer's office." "I hated the coffee. The lawyer was fine." Wesley turned several pages. There it was. The recorded easement. Stamped. Filed. Referenced by book and page. At the county clerk's office. He set the old agreement beside Grant's packet. Then he began looking for it. Not the full document. He did not expect a sales packet to include every page. But a serious title review should have acknowledged the restriction plainly. A conservation easement was not a decorative footnote. It was the kind of thing lenders cared about, buyers cared about, insurers cared about, and developers either respected or tried to walk around. He found the reference on page 17. One sentence. Existing environmental and access-related documents may be subject to further review. Wesley read it twice. Then he read the surrounding paragraph. It was written to sound like caution while hiding the object of caution. No mention of permanent restriction. No mention of development limits. No mention of the conservancy. No mention of the recorded book and page. A person skimming the packet would think it was routine. A banker might call it manageable. A developer might call it flexible. Wesley felt a slow, cold anger begin to form. Linda looked at him. "What?" He turned the page toward her. She read the sentence. "That's it? That's it. But the agreement is..." She searched for the word. "Binding." "Yes, it still is." "Then why would they write it like that?" Wesley leaned back in the metal chair. It gave a tired squeak beneath him, so somebody could pretend not to know. The words stayed in the room. They were not dramatic. They were worse than dramatic. They were practical. At noon, Frank brought sandwiches from town wrapped in butcher paper. He placed them on the only clear corner of the desk and stared at the spread of documents. "You find the snake yet?" he asked. "Found the grass moving." Frank nodded as if that made perfect sense. Wesley told him about the easement. Frank's expression tightened. He remembered the flood year. Everyone in the county did. He had been the one who helped Wesley drive steel posts into the roadside after the water dropped. "That land's protected," Frank said. "It is. Then how are they planning to build on it?" "They're not saying they can. They're saying just enough so other people don't ask hard questions too early. Frank looked at Grant's packet. That takes a certain kind of schooling, or a certain kind of character. Sometimes those come in the same suit. Wesley picked up the phone after lunch and called the county clerk's office. He expected a recording, then a long wait, then a young person who would tell him to check the website. Instead, a woman answered after 3 rings. County clerk and recorder. This is Nora. Wesley gave his name and asked how to obtain a certified copy of a recorded easement from 2009. Nora was polite, efficient, and utterly uninterested in his family crisis, which Wesley appreciated. She told him the easement was still indexed under his parcel numbers and available for certified copy. Still indexed. The words eased one fear and sharpened another. No one had erased the record. They had only tried to make it disappear in plain sight. After he hung up, Wesley sat still for a moment. Linda watched him from across the room. What did she say? It's there. Then we're safe? He wished she had not asked it that way. Safe was not the same as right. Safe was not the same as over. Safe was what people said before they understood how much it cost to prove the obvious. The record is safe, he said. We're not done. Linda accepted that without arguing. By mid-afternoon, Wesley had made a list of inconsistencies. The easement buried in vague language. The survey authorization tied to an electronic signature he had not provided. The bank inquiry tied to a possible property transition. The insurance review triggered by change in land use. Different documents. Same direction. He taped 4 sheets to the wall above the metal desk. Grant packet. Survey work order. Bank inquiry. Insurance notice. Then he drew arrows between them with a black marker. Linda came to stand beside him. For a long time, they both looked at the wall. It was strange how much worse the truth became once it had shape. Before, it had been a feeling. A chill. At the dinner table. A false signature. Survey stakes in the snow. Now it was a sequence. Someone had made Wesley appear cooperative. Someone had alerted a survey company. Someone had triggered a financing conversation. Someone had caused an insurer to reassess risk. And someone had softened the one document that could stop everything. Linda folded her arms tightly. They weren't waiting for us to agree, she said. No, they were building around us. Wesley turned to her. That was exactly it. Not pushing through the front door. Building around them. A careful frame, piece by piece, until the house of consent stood without the people who supposedly consented. Linda reached for the black marker. Wesley handed it to her. She wrote one word beneath the arrows. Pattern. The letters were firmer than her voice had been all morning. Wesley looked at the word. Then at his wife. Something passed between them then. Not comfort, not even hope. Something more useful. Alignment. For 38 years, Wesley had been the one who handled files, measurements, maps, and arguments with contractors. Linda had handled people, memory, birthdays, meals, grief, and the invisible work that made a family believe it was a family. Now those worlds were touching. The paper had hurt her, so she had named it. Pattern. That single word gave the room a different center. Wesley took the marker back and circled it. Late in the afternoon, Frank returned from the front office with a name written on the back of an oil change receipt. Claire Donnelly, he said, dropping it on the desk. Wesley looked up. Who? You remember old Bellamy's law office? Arthur Bellamy? Before he retired and died, yes. Claire ran his files. Or ran him. Depends who you ask. Linda picked up the receipt. I know that name, she said. Small woman, silver hair. Always wore red reading glasses. That's her, Frank said. Sharper than a new saw blade, and twice as likely to cut you if you waste her time. Wesley looked at the receipt. Frank leaned against the doorframe. If somebody buried something in a title packet, Claire will know whether it was stupidity or sport. Wesley did not like asking for help. He never had. Not because he was proud, though Linda had accused him of that often enough. He disliked needing help because help meant letting someone else touch the weight, and he had spent most of his life believing weight was his job. But the wall above the desk told him this was no longer just weight. It was structure, and structure needed more than one set of eyes. He called the number before he could talk himself out of it. Claire answered on the fifth ring. Yes? Her voice was dry, direct, and suspicious of interruption. Mrs. Donnelly, my name is Wesley Hartman. Frank Delaney gave me your number. That can be either a recommendation or a warning. Probably both. A short pause. Then, to his surprise, she laughed once. What does Frank think I can do for you? Wesley explained carefully. He did not pour out the family pain. He did not mention Thanksgiving except as a date. He described the documents, the easement, the title packet, the missing emphasis, the electronic authorization. Claire did not interrupt. That impressed him. When he finished, she said, Bring copies, not originals. I can come tomorrow. You can come in an hour if you want me curious. Tomorrow if you want me annoyed. Wesley looked at Linda. Linda was already reaching for her coat. We'll come now, Wesley said. Claire lived above a closed bookstore on Main Street, in a narrow apartment reached by a staircase that smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner. She opened the door before they knocked twice. She was smaller than Wesley remembered, with short silver hair, red glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, and a cardigan the color of storm clouds. But nothing about her felt soft. Her eyes moved from Wesley to Linda to the file box in Wesley's hands and seemed to take inventory of all three. Kitchen table, she said, stepping aside. That was all the invitation they got. Her apartment was neat, crowded with books, and warm enough to fog Wesley's glasses when he stepped inside. A kettle hissed on the stove. On the kitchen wall hung an old framed certificate from a legal secretaries association, the kind of modest credential people overlook until they need someone who remembers where everybody is buried. Claire spread the documents under a hanging light and began reading. She read differently from Wesley. Wesley followed structure. Dates, references, sequence. Claire followed behavior. Her finger moved down margins, stopped at word choices, circled omissions, tapped formatting changes. After 10 minutes, she reached for a red pencil. After 20, she had marked 6 places. After 30, she removed her glasses and looked at Wesley. Well, she said, this wasn't done by an idiot. Linda's face tightened. Is that good or bad? Bad for your nerves. Good for proving intent. Wesley leaned forward. Claire turned the title summary toward him. Your easement wasn't removed. That would be obvious. It was demoted. See here? They refer to it as environmental and access-related documents. Plural. Vague. Passive. Then they separate the recorded reference from the development limitations by 4 pages. A lazy reviewer might miss the connection. She turned another page. Here, they misspell Bitterroot Watershed Conservancy as Bitterroot Water Conservancy. Small change. Enough to make a database search fail if someone copies it exactly. Wesley felt Linda go still beside him. Claire tapped the signature page. And this electronic authorization? It's not a sale approval. That's how they'll defend it. But it creates a paper trail that says you were informed and cooperative. I wasn't. I believe you. The document was not written for me. The sentence landed heavily. Claire sat back. Who prepared this? Grant Voss brought it. Her mouth tightened. I asked who prepared it. Wesley looked at the footer of the title summary. There was a small line he had barely noticed before. Prepared for preliminary review by Morrow Land Services. Claire's expression changed at the name, not dramatically, but enough. You know them? Wesley asked. I know the kind of work they do. Frank would have asked what that meant. Linda did not. She understood that Claire was not ready to say more. Claire gathered the marked pages and clipped them together. Leave me copies. I'll make a few calls. Wesley hesitated. You said copies, not originals. And you listened. That's why I'm still talking to you. Linda surprised them both by smiling. Claire looked at her more gently then. I know what this feels like, she said. Not your exact situation. But the part where people hide cruelty inside language, clean enough to notarize. Linda's smile disappeared. Yes, she said. That part. Claire slid the clipped packet back across the table. Tonight. Go back to Frank's. Make a timeline. Every call. Every email. Every person who touched this. Do not argue with your children by phone if you can help it. And do not sign so much as a birthday card until someone you trust reads it first. Wesley stood slowly. For the first time all day, he felt less like a man alone in a room full of paper. Not safe, not vindicated, but oriented. As they left Claire's apartment, Linda held the railing on the stairs. Halfway down, she stopped and looked back toward the closed door. She didn't pity us, Linda said. No, she got angry in the right place. Wesley nodded. Outside, Main Street was already dark. The shop windows reflected Christmas lights strung too early, red and green trembling in the glass. People moved past with takeout bags and grocery sacks, living ordinary lives beneath ordinary troubles. Wesley carried the marked documents under his arm. The red pencil circles seemed to burn through the folder. Back at the mill, he taped Claire's marked pages to the wall beneath Linda's word. Pattern. Then he added another word beside it. Intent. He stood back and looked at both. Pattern. Intent. The room had changed again. The papers were no longer just evidence that something had happened to him. They were evidence that someone had designed it. Wesley turned off the desk lamp after midnight, but he did not remove the pages from the wall. He wanted them there in the morning. He wanted the first thing he saw to be the truth, no matter how ugly it looked under fluorescent light. By 7 the next morning, Wesley had already read the marked pages twice. The mill office was colder than it had been the night before. The little heater clicked and hummed near Linda's chair, fighting a losing battle against the draft slipping through the old window frame. Outside, frost coated the lumber stacks and turned every nailhead in the yard silver. On the wall above the metal desk, the two words stared back at him. Pattern. Intent. Linda had written the first one. Wesley had added the second. Together, they made the room feel less like a refuge and more like a place where a verdict was waiting to be assembled. Frank came in carrying a paper bag from the diner and set it beside the coffee pot. Biscuits, he said, because none of us are young enough to solve crime on black coffee alone. Linda looked up from the couch, where she had been folding and refolding the same sweater for 10 minutes. Thank you, Frank. Frank glanced at the wall. Those words get any friendlier overnight? No, Wesley said. Didn't think so. Before Wesley could answer, the phone on Frank's desk rang. Frank frowned at it as if phones were a personal insult. He picked it up, listened, then held it out toward Wesley. Woman named Claire. Sounds like she already knows you're standing there. Wesley took the receiver. Claire? I made 2 calls, Claire Donnelly said without greeting. You need a lawyer who understands land use restrictions, not a family lawyer who thinks a property dispute is just people yelling over a deed. Wesley straightened. You have someone? Rachel Pierce. Environmental law. Conservation restrictions. Development review. Used to work cases out of Helena. Moved back closer to family after her husband died. She doesn't advertise much because she doesn't need to. Linda had stopped folding. Claire continued. I told her enough to make her curious. Not enough to make her your attorney. That part is your job. When can she see us? She has an opening at 10:30. If you're late, don't blame me. Wesley looked at the clock. It was already 8:15. Where? Claire gave him the address, then added, bring the title packet, the easement, the survey work order, banknotes, insurance email, and whatever dignity you still feel like keeping. Some lawyers make people beg. Rachel does not. But she will not tolerate drama in place of facts. Wesley almost smiled. Sounds like you two are friends. We respect the same enemies. The line went dead. Rachel Pierce's office occupied the second floor of a brick building that had once housed a feed supplier. The stairs were narrow, and the hallway smelled faintly of old wood, printer toner, and wet wool from coats hung outside office doors. Her name was painted on a frosted glass panel in plain black letters. Rachel Pierce. Environmental and property law. No gold trim, no slogan, no promise of justice. A woman opened the door before they had time to knock twice. Rachel Pierce was in her early 50s, though her posture made her seem ageless in the way certain teachers and trial attorneys did. She wore no makeup beyond what the cold had put in her cheeks. Her dark hair, threaded with gray, was pulled back at the nape of her neck. She had a narrow face, steady eyes, and a voice that made every unnecessary word feel expensive. Mr. and Mrs. Hartman? Yes, Wesley said. I'm Rachel. Come in. Her office was clean without being decorative. A wall of file cabinets stood opposite two bookshelves filled with land use manuals, Montana water law binders, and old case reporters. On the windowsill sat a single clay pot with a struggling green plant that looked as if it had survived several legal battles and resented them all. Rachel gestured toward the conference table. Claire said you brought documents. Wesley set the file box down. I brought copies. Good. Originals stay with you, unless I specifically ask otherwise. Linda glanced at Wesley. It was the second time in 2 days someone had said that. The repetition did not feel annoying. It felt like the beginning of a boundary. Rachel did not ask them to tell the story from the beginning. She asked for the timeline. Wesley appreciated that. He laid it out in order. Thanksgiving dinner. Grant Voss, the electronic signature. Survey crew. Bank inquiry. Insurance notice. Easement reference buried in the title summary. Claire's markings. Rachel listened without interrupting. She took notes in small, precise handwriting, occasionally pausing to mark a question in the margin. When Wesley finished, she did not speak right away. She spread the documents into separate stacks. First, she said, I need to be clear. A conservation easement is not a magic shield. People challenge them. People misread them. People try to negotiate around them. But if yours is properly recorded and still held by an active conservancy, it is a serious barrier to development. It's recorded, Wesley said. And the conservancy? Bitterroot Watershed Conservancy. Rachel nodded. I know them. Linda leaned forward. Can they just ignore it? No, Rachel said, but they can create confusion long enough to pressure you into signing something that makes their job easier. The room went quiet. That was the sentence Wesley had not wanted, but needed. Rachel continued. The electronic authorization matters because it gives them a beginning. Not a sale. Not a transfer. But a beginning. Survey access. Title review. Financing inquiries. Insurance underwriting. Each step makes the next step look less strange. They were building around us, Linda said softly. Rachel looked at her. That's a good way to put it. Linda's eyes lowered, not with embarrassment, but because being understood sometimes hurt almost as much as being dismissed. Rachel turned to another page. Now I need to ask about your children. Wesley felt the room tighten. Ethan and Meredith, Rachel said. Which one benefits first if this project moves forward? Wesley wanted to answer neither. He wanted to say his children were confused, misled, foolish, pressured. Anything but what the question required. Instead, he looked at Linda. Linda's face had gone still. Ethan, she said. Wesley looked at her. She did not apologize for saying it. Rachel made a note. Why? Linda's voice remained quiet. Because Meredith likes control. Ethan needs money. Wesley stared at the table. There it was. Not from a document, not from a lawyer. From the woman who had packed his son's school lunches, remembered his allergies, and sent him birthday cards even during years when he forgot to call. Rachel did not soften the question. How much trouble is he in? Wesley exhaled. I don't know. Frank had come with them and sat silently near the wall, arms folded, his cap in his lap. At that, he shifted. I might know part of it, he said. Everyone turned. Frank looked uncomfortable, not because he was unsure, but because old loyalties were complicated things. I heard talk last month, he said, at Miller's Supply. Ethan's company had an accident on a site outside Billings. Worker got hurt bad. There's a lawsuit coming, maybe already filed. Linda closed her eyes. Wesley felt the words enter him slowly, like cold water soaking through canvas. Why didn't you tell me? Frank looked at him. Because gossip isn't a bridge inspection, Wes. You don't report cracks unless you know they're there. Rachel wrote something down. What kind of accident? Fall from a temporary platform from what I heard. Safety rail issue. Insurance fighting it. Wesley's hands tightened on the edge of the table. Ethan had grown up around job sites. He knew better. Wesley had taught him better. Temporary rails. Load limits. Fall protection. Never trust a platform you would not stand on yourself. For a moment, Wesley was not thinking about the land. He was seeing Ethan at 12 years old, carrying a lunch pail too large for him, following his father around a county bridge site during summer break. The boy had asked questions all day. Why the beams were shaped that way. Why wet concrete had to be covered. Why men checked each other's harnesses before climbing. Because, Wesley had told him, a mistake gets heavy when it falls. Now that sentence came back with cruel timing. Rachel's voice pulled him back. If Ethan is facing a serious claim and coverage issues, he may be under pressure. Debt. Lawsuit exposure. Business collapse. Linda opened her eyes. Pressure is not permission. No, Rachel said. It isn't. Wesley looked at her then. He liked that she did not excuse Ethan. He liked even more that she did not flatten him into a villain. The truth, he was beginning to understand, might be worse than simple evil. It might be weakness wearing the clothes of responsibility. Rachel tapped Grant Voss's name. And this man likely knows exactly where Ethan is vulnerable. How would he know? Linda asked. Developers and advisors make it their business to know who has leverage and who needs relief. A distressed contractor with family land tied to valuable shoreline would be attractive. Wesley's voice came out lower than he expected. My son brought a man like that to my table. Rachel held his Gaza. Yes. No decoration, no comfort, just the fact. Wesley looked away first. At that moment, the shame surprised him. Not Ethan's shame, his own. He wondered what he had missed. Whether pride had made him blind. Whether all those years of telling Ethan to stand on his own had left his son unable to come home before desperation made him crooked. Whether strength, taught too hard, could become a locked door. Linda seemed to know where his mind had gone. Don't, she said. Wesley turned. She looked at him with a firmness he had not heard since the hospital year when he tried to leave bed too early after surgery. Don't take his choices and turn them into your failure. The word struck him harder than Rachel's legal warnings. Frank looked down at his cap. Rachel was quiet. Wesley could not answer. The room blurred slightly at the edges, though he would have denied it if anyone asked. Linda reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Not to comfort him this time. To stop him from carrying what was not his. Rachel let the moment sit. Then she slid a blank sheet of paper toward Wesley. Here is what we do next. Not emotionally. Practically. He nodded once. First, I send a preservation letter to Grant Voss and any entity listed in the packet. That tells them to preserve all communications, drafts, signatures, metadata, and correspondence connected to your property. Metadata? Frank muttered. Rachel did not look up. The part people forget can testify. Frank grunted. I like it. Second, Rachel continued. We notify the Conservancy that a development-related review may be moving forward under questionable authorization. They need to know. Wesley nodded. Third, we identify who prepared the electronic signature and where it came from. Can you do that? Linda asked. Not instantly. But people leave trails, email invitations, DocuSign envelopes, IP logs, account access. Someone initiated it. And Ethan? Wesley asked. Rachel studied him. That depends on what you want. The question opened a space Wesley did not want to enter. What I want? You can treat this as a legal threat only, or a family rupture with legal consequences. Those are not the same strategy. Linda's hand remained on his. Wesley looked at the documents. For 2 days, he had been focused on the thing done to him. The false signature. The survey stakes. The hidden easement reference. Now Rachel was asking what kind of man he intended to be after discovering it. He thought of Ethan's silence on the phone, then Meredith's text, then Grant's clean smile at the Thanksgiving table. I want the truth protected before anyone gets a chance to rewrite it, Wesley said. Rachel nodded, as if that answer had weight. That we can do. Before they left, Rachel asked for permission to run a background search on the entities named in the packet. Voss Development Advisory, Morrow Land Services, and any related financing contacts. Wesley agreed. As they stood, Linda asked the question Wesley had avoided. Should we call Ethan? Rachel gathered the folders into a neat stack. I would not call him to argue. I would not warn him about every step. And I would not accuse him without knowing what he signed, forwarded, approved, or allowed. But, Rachel looked at Linda, then at Wesley. But if he is your son, and if there is any part of him still reachable, he may tell you more through what he cannot say than through what he admits. They drove back toward the mill in silence. The road was pale beneath a thin afternoon sun. Fields stretched on either side, frozen and open. Frank sat in the back seat of Wesley's pickup, unusually quiet. Linda watched the passing fence posts, one hand resting on the recipe box she had brought from home, as if touching something small and inherited could steady what was large and breaking. Halfway back, Wesley pulled into the gravel lot of a closed bait shop. Linda looked at him. "What are you doing?" He took out his phone. For several seconds he stared at Ethan's name. Then he called. Ethan answered on the fourth ring. "Dad?" The voice was guarded, tired, younger than 54 somehow. Wesley looked through the windshield at the empty bait shop windows. "Were you going to tell me about the accident?" Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Silence. Linda closed her eyes beside him. Frank shifted in the back but said nothing. Ethan's breath crackled faintly through the phone. "Who told you?" "That's your question?" "Dad, it's complicated. A man fell?" Another silence. "Yes." "How bad?" Ethan inhaled shakily. "Bad." Wesley gripped the steering wheel. "Insurance?" "They're reviewing coverage. That means they're looking for a reason not to pay." "I know what it means." There was anger in Ethan's voice now, but beneath it Wesley heard something else. Exhaustion. Panic. Shame. Held together by pride. "Is that why you let Grant into this?" Wesley asked. Ethan did not answer. Wesley leaned back against the seat. "Did you use my signature?" "No." The answer came fast. Too fast. Then Ethan added, quieter, "Not like that." Linda opened her eyes. Wesley's voice stayed calm. "There is no clean version of that sentence." "Dad, I didn't think it would go that far." "What far?" "I thought it was just access. Just review. Grant said nobody was selling anything without you. He said once you saw the numbers, you'd understand." "The numbers." "I was trying to keep my company alive." Wesley shut his eyes. There it was. Not the whole truth, maybe, but enough to hurt cleanly. "And your mother?" Wesley asked. Ethan said nothing. "You changed the ground under her feet too." "Dad, no, not now." Wesley opened his eyes again. For a moment, he wanted to say everything. He wanted to tell Ethan about the easement, Claire, Rachel, the preservation letter, the pattern on the wall. He wanted to make his son feel the size of what he had done, but Rachel's warning held him back. Do not warn him about every step. Wesley swallowed the anger. "We are not discussing this by phone again," he said. "Dad, please, I can explain. You already started." He ended the call before his voice could betray him. No one spoke in the truck. Outside, the bait shop sign creaked in the wind. Linda looked at Wesley, and he knew she had heard what he had heard. Ethan had not confessed. Not fully. But he had stopped pretending nothing was wrong. That mattered. Not enough to forgive. Enough to know where to look. Wesley started the truck again. When they returned to the mill, he walked straight to the wall above the desk. Pattern. Inton. He picked up the black marker. For a long moment, he stood with the cap off, the tip hovering near the paper. Then he added a third word. Pressure. Linda stood behind him. Frank remained in the doorway. Wesley capped the marker slowly. Pattern, intent, pressure. The case had changed shape. It was no longer only about what someone had tried to take. It was about what fear could make a son willing to trade. The word pressure stayed on the wall longer than Wesley wanted to look at it. By morning, the ink had dried into the paper, black and permanent under the weak office light. Pattern, intent, pressure. 3 words. Each one heavier than the last. They did not accuse one person neatly. They did not let Wesley divide the world into the innocent and the guilty. They sat there like measurements on a damaged beam, telling him where the load had shifted. Linda made coffee without speaking much. Frank went out early to check the roof over the lumber stacks, though the sky was clear. Wesley knew the errand was mostly an excuse. Frank had never been comfortable standing too close to another man's family wound. He could brace a sagging wall without blinking, but grief made him search for tools. At 8:30, Claire Donnelly arrived at the mill office carrying a canvas tote bag and wearing a wool coat too large for her narrow shoulders. She did not knock. She opened the door, took one look at the wall and paused. "You added a word." Wesley turned from the desk. "Pressure." Claire removed her gloves finger by finger. "That word usually brings friends." "Friends?" "More documents." She set the tote bag on the desk and pulled out a folder, a yellow notepad, and a small thermos. Linda watched her carefully. "You found something?" "Not found." "Remembered." Claire sat down as if her knees disliked the idea, but her mind had overruled them. She opened the folder and placed a handwritten note in front of Wesley. It contained a name he had not seen in years. Arthur Bellamy. The ink seemed to pull a whole room out of memory. Wesley remembered Arthur as a thin man in suspenders who kept peppermints in a glass jar and spoke to clients as if legal language were a fence that needed mending, not a wall meant to keep them out. He had helped Wesley and Linda complete the conservation easement 15 years earlier. The office had smelled like old books and burnt coffee, and Linda had complained afterward that the coffee had tasted like it had lost an argument. "Arthur handled the easement," Wesley said. Claire nodded. "He handled more than that." Linda looked between them. "What do you mean?" Claire tapped the note. "Arthur had a habit. If he thought a client might someday be pressured by family, buyers, neighbors, or their own bad memory, he wrote internal memoranda, plain English summaries, not always formal filings, sometimes letters, sometimes trustee instructions. Sometimes he kept copies in case the client forgot what they had done and why." Wesley frowned. "He kept those?" "Arthur kept everything. Receipts from 1973, Christmas cards from judges he disliked, drafts of wills that never got signed. After he died, his wife Nora kept the storage boxes because she said throwing them away felt like burying him twice. The room grew still. Rachel Pierce arrived 10 minutes later, her briefcase in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other. She greeted everyone briefly. Then Claire repeated what she had said. Rachel did not react strongly, but Wesley saw her attention sharpen. "Where are the boxes now?" Rachel asked. "Nora's place," Claire said. "Outside Missoula. I called her last night. And she said if Wesley Hartman needs Arthur's old files, she'll open the garage." Wesley looked at Linda. Linda's face had changed at the mention of Arthur. Not with hope exactly. Hope was too bright a word. It was more like the faint lifting of a curtain in a room that had been shut for days. Rachel set her coffee down. "We should go today." Frank, who had reappeared in the doorway at some point, grunted. "Roads are clear." Claire put on her gloves again. "Then let's go before the weather remembers it's Montana." Nora Bellamy lived outside Missoula in a low white house with blue shutters and bird feeders hanging from nearly every branch of a leafless maple tree. The yard was tidy, not because it was new or easy to maintain, but because someone had loved order long after life had stopped giving it freely. Nora opened the door before they reached the porch. She was in her late 70s, with white hair braided over one shoulder and a face lined in delicate, patient folds. She wore a green cardigan and house shoes, and she held the storm door open with the careful dignity of someone who had learned to be old without apologizing for it. "Claire," she said, then looked past her to Wesley. "You must be Mr. Hartman." "Wesley," he said. Her eyes softened. "Arthur liked you." Wesley did not know what to say to that. Praise from the dead always felt heavier than praise from the living. Linda stepped forward. "I'm Linda." Nora took her hand in both of hers. "Yes. I remember your name from the file. Arthur wrote that you asked the best questions." Linda gave a small, surprised laugh. "I asked if we still had to pay taxes." "That sounds like a very good question." The garage smelled of cardboard, cedar chips, and the faint mineral dampness that clung to concrete in winter. Shelves lined 2 walls from floor to ceiling, every shelf filled with bankers' boxes labeled in Arthur Bellamy's precise handwriting. Nora turned on 2 overhead bulbs. They flickered, then steadied. "I never had the heart to move them," she said. My nephew told me to rent a shred truck. I told him a person should not be so eager to destroy what he never bothered to understand. Claire smiled faintly. I always liked you. I know, Nora said. You hid it poorly. For a brief moment, the garage felt almost human. Then Rachel began reading labels. Bellamy Estate drafts. Ranch access disputes. Water rights closed. Conservancy matters. Hartman Lake easement. Wesley saw the box at the same time Linda did. It sat on the second shelf, neither hidden nor displayed. Just waiting, as plain as an old tool returned to its hook. Frank lifted it down. The cardboard gave a soft crackle in his hands. Nora led them to a folding table she had already set up near the back wall. Rachel put on thin gloves. Claire did not. She said Arthur's paper had survived worse than her fingers. Inside the box were file folders bound with red string, copied deeds, correspondence, maps, and a small envelope containing the original office index card for Wesley and Linda Hartman. On the card, Arthur had written in blue ink, "Clients understand land as duty, not investment." Wesley stared at the sentence. He had forgotten Arthur noticing that. Linda read it over his shoulder, and for the first time that day, her eyes filled for a reason that did not look like injury. "He saw us," she whispered. "Not their land value, not their age, not their usefulness. Them." Rachel gave them a moment, then opened the largest folder. The first pages were familiar. The easement, the recorded references, the conservancy correspondence. Then came a thinner folder labeled Memorandum Future Control. Rachel's posture changed. Claire leaned closer. Wesley felt Linda's fingers tighten around his sleeve. Rachel read in silence for nearly 2 minutes. Then she turned the pages toward Wesley. "This is important." The memorandum was written in plain language, just as Claire had said. Arthur had summarized a provision Wesley only vaguely remembered approving. If any future owner, heir, or representative attempted to undermine the conservation purpose of the land, oversight authority could shift to an independent review structure. The structure included the conservancy, the county, and a trustee designated by Wesley and Linda. The trustee of record was Frank Delaney. Frank stared at the page as if someone had just handed him a newborn. "Me?" Wesley looked at him. "I remember talking about a backup." "I don't remember naming you," Claire snorted softly. "That sounds exactly like Arthur. He probably asked who you trusted with a bridge in bad weather." Wesley looked down at the page again. Frank's full name was there. Franklin James Delaney. Address at the old mill. Alternate contact. County Projects Office. Now closed. Frank took off his cap. He did not speak for a while. When he finally did, his voice was rougher than usual. "You should have picked someone smarter. I picked someone who shows up," Wesley said. Frank looked away first. The words settled into the cold garage with more tenderness than either man knew how to hold. Rachel read further. "This does not automatically end the current threat, but it gives us a strong argument that any attempted development contrary to the easement triggers additional oversight. It also shows your intent at the time the easement was created." "Intent," Linda said softly. Wesley looked at her, then at the old word on the page. There were 2 kinds of intent now. Theirs had been protection. Someone else's had been extraction. Nora stood quietly near the shelves, watching them as if she had seen this kind of thing before. Old paper waking up at the exact moment living people needed it. Rachel asked to copy the memorandum. Nora agreed at once. While Claire and Rachel continued reviewing the box, Linda stepped away from the table. Wesley followed her with his eyes, but did not go after her immediately. She had stopped by a shelf near the side door, where a thin strip of winter light fell across the concrete. She was looking at nothing. Wesley knew that look. It meant she was feeling too much to choose one feeling. He crossed to her. "You all right?" "No," she said. The answer was so simple it nearly broke him. Before he could respond, Rachel called from the table. "Wesley." Her voice had changed. Not loud, not panicked, but stripped of warmth. He turned. Rachel held a separate document Claire had found inside a smaller folder tucked behind the easement correspondence. It was not from Arthur's office originally. It appeared to be a copy someone had sent years later. likely for estate planning coordination. Rachel looked at Linda, then back at Wesley. This is a life insurance beneficiary change form. Wesley walked back slowly. Linda did not move at first. Then she came too, as if every step required permission from a body that no longer trusted the floor. Rachel placed the form on the table. The policy number was familiar. Wesley had taken out the policy years ago, not because he expected to die soon, but because responsible men of his generation had been taught to leave something behind that did not require their wives to beg anyone. Primary beneficiary, originally, Linda Mae Hartman, but the form showed a change. Primary beneficiary, Hartman Family, Transition Trust. Trust administrators listed, Ethan Hartman and Meredith Cole. Wesley read the names once. Then again, the garage became very quiet. Frank said something under his breath that might have been a curse or a prayer. Linda did not cry. That was worse. She stood with her hands at her sides and looked at the paper as if it belonged to strangers. Her name had not been removed entirely. She was listed later, in language about discretionary care, surviving spouse needs, and managed distribution. It was the kind of language Meredith might call responsible. Wesley could barely breathe around it. Rachel turned the page. This copy may not be the final recorded change. We need to verify directly with the insurer. But if this was submitted, or even prepared for submission, it broadens the issue. Claire's face had gone hard behind her red glasses. Linda finally spoke. They made a plan for after he dies. No one answered. She looked at Wesley then, not with accusation, not with fear, with something deeper and more intimate. They sat at our table, she said, and they had already imagined me needing permission. Wesley reached for her. This time she let him. He took her hand, and it felt colder than the garage. For years, Wesley had believed betrayal meant someone taking what was yours, a tool, a dollar, a deed, a field. But now, he understood there was another kind, one that moved ahead of you in time and rearranged the world after your absence, one that did not simply steal from your life, but planned around your death. He looked down at the policy form and saw not numbers, not clauses, not beneficiary lines. He saw Linda alone at a kitchen table, being told by their children what she was allowed to have. The image struck him with such force that he had to place one hand on the folding table. Rachel noticed. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine." That was not a medical question. Wesley sat. Linda remained standing beside him, still holding his hand. Nora Bellamy stepped away and returned a moment later with a box of tissues. She did not offer one directly. She simply placed the box near Linda and turned away, granting her the mercy of privacy in a room full of people. Claire began sorting the new document into a separate folder. Rachel took notes. Frank stood near the garage door, jaw tight, looking like a man who wanted something physical to fix and hated that the damage had come wearing signatures. After several minutes, Wesley looked at Rachel. "What do we do with it?" "First, verify whether the beneficiary change was actually filed. Second, identify who prepared the trust. Third, compare signatures, dates, and access permissions. Fourth, we keep this separate from the land issue until we understand whether the same people and entities are involved." "Same pattern?" Linda asked. Rachel met her eyes. "Possibly." Linda nodded once. Her face was pale, but something in it had settled. Not peace. Not yet. But a hard clarity that made Wesley think of ice thick enough to hold weight. She looked at the document again. Then she took the red pencil Claire had left on the table. Claire opened her mouth as if to object, then closed it. Linda did not write on the original copy. She placed a blank sheet over it and wrote 3 words at the top. "After I'm gone." Wesley stared at the words. Linda underlined them once. "That is what this says," she said. Her voice did not shake. Not in legal language, in plain language. No one corrected her. No one could. That was the moment Wesley understood that this was no longer only his investigation. It never had been. Linda was not standing beside him as the wife of the man targeted. She had been targeted too, in quieter ink. Rachel asked Nora for permission to photograph the full folder for reference before making formal copies. Nora agreed, then placed her hand gently on the box. Arthur used to say people show who they are by what they protect when no one is watching. Wesley looked up. Nora gave a sad smile. He wrote that after a ranch family tried to sell around their mother's trust, I remember because he came home furious and burned the roast. Claire made a sound that was almost a laugh. Wesley looked back at the Hartman box. Arthur had been dead for years. Yet the man's habit of keeping paper, of writing plain notes, of preserving intent, had reached forward into this cold garage and put a brace under Wesley's life when it had begun to bend. They packed the files carefully. Nora allowed Rachel to take copies of the memorandum and the insurance form, but the original box stayed with her until proper arrangements could be made. Wesley respected that. Some guardians did not look like trustees or lawyers. Some looked like widows in green cardigans who refused to let a shred truck erase a lifetime of careful work. Before they left, Nora walked Linda to the door. "I'm sorry," she said. Linda looked down at the porch boards. "People keep saying that. I know. It doesn't fix anything." "No," Nora said. "But sometimes it keeps the silence from feeling empty." Linda looked at her then. "Thank you." The drive back to the mill felt longer than the drive out. No one spoke much. Frank drove this time because Wesley had not asked him to, but had not objected when he took the keys. Claire sat in the back beside Rachel, both of them reviewing notes in low voices. Linda sat beside Wesley, holding the folder containing copies on her lap with both hands. When they reached the mill, the sun had already dropped behind the tree line. The office was cold again. The wall waited. Pattern. Entend. Pressure. Wesley stood before it, holding the copy of Arthur's memorandum in one hand and the insurance form in the other. For a long while he did not move. Then Linda stepped beside him. She took the marker from the desk. Wesley watched her uncap it. This time she did not ask. She did not look at him for permission. She wrote the fourth word herself, beneath the others. Provision. Then, beside it, in smaller letters, she wrote another phrase, "After I'm gone." Wesley felt the breath leave him. Linda capped the marker and set it down. Her eyes were wet now, but her voice was steady. "They were not just planning around the land," she said. "They were planning around us." Wesley looked at the wall. Pattern. Intent. Pressure. Provision. And beneath them, Linda's plain translation, "After I'm gone." He understood then that some documents did not simply reveal facts. Some documents changed the room in which a marriage stood. He reached for Linda's hand. This time neither of them let go. Rachel Pierce did not let Wesley practice being wounded. That was the first thing she made clear. The morning after they returned from Nora Bellamy's house, Wesley stood in the mill office with his notes in one hand and Arthur's memorandum on the desk before him. The wall behind the metal desk had become a record of everything they had learned. Pattern. Intent. Pressure. Provision. After I'm gone. Linda had written the last phrase herself. Wesley still had trouble looking at it for too long. Rachel arrived just after 9, carrying a cardboard tube, a stack of folders, and the kind of calm that made other people sit straighter. Claire came with her, red glasses already low on her nose, a pencil tucked behind one ear. Frank had cleared the largest work table and spread a county map across it, weighting the corners with a hammer, a coffee mug, an old pulley wheel, and a box of screws. "We have the county pre-review meeting tomorrow afternoon," Rachel said. "It's not a trial. It's not a family reckoning. It's not therapy with folding chairs," Frank grunted. "That rules out most county meetings." Rachel ignored him. "It is a procedural meeting about access, water, preliminary land use, and environmental review. That means we do not lead with Thanksgiving. We do not lead with betrayal. We do not lead with your children." Wesley looked at her. "What do we lead with?" Rachel uncapped a marker and tapped the county map. "The land." Linda sat near the heater, hands folded around a mug she had not drunk from. She looked tired, but the fragile pallor of the previous day had hardened into something quieter. Not anger exactly. Not yet peace. A woman could live for decades beside a man and still discover new rooms inside her own strength. Rachel unrolled a topographic map over the county map. "You were a bridge engineer," she said. "County roads and bridges. Good. Then speak like one. Explain water movement. Explain slope. Explain the old flood. Explain why the lower meadow matters. You are not there to ask people to feel sorry for you. You are there to remind them that this land has function. Wesley looked down at the contour lines. He knew them like veins on the back of his own hand. The low meadow caught overflow before it reached 3 houses along County Road 6. The cottonwoods braced the bank. The shallow marsh along the eastern edge filtered runoff before it entered the lake. The road cut near the north boundary had washed out once before and would again if widened without care. For years he had thought of those facts as common sense. Now they had become defense. Claire placed a folder beside the map. I'll bring marked copies of the title packet. Not to grandstand. Just enough to show the easement was minimized in the summary. And Arthur's memorandum? Linda asked. Rachel nodded. We use it carefully. It establishes original intent and the trustee provision. Frank may need to confirm he is the named trustee. Frank looked up from pouring coffee. I was hoping to remain furniture. You're unusually verbal furniture, Claire said. He frowned at her. That a compliment? No. Rachel looked at Frank. You do not need a speech. You only need to answer if asked whether you were aware Wesley and Linda intended the land to remain protected. Frank looked at Wesley. I was aware, he said. Wesley heard something beneath the dry voice. A promise not newly made but newly named. For the rest of the morning, they prepared. Not like people preparing for a fight. Like people reinforcing a structure before weather arrived. Rachel organized the evidence into clean sequence. Recorded easement, misleading title summary, survey work order, preservation letter, Arthur's memorandum, county water maps. Claire made an index in her compact handwriting, muttering whenever a page number refused to behave. Frank went to the storage shed and returned with an old rolled map from the flood year, the edges frayed and stained from field use. Wesley had forgotten it existed. It was not polished. It was not legal. It was a working map covered with pencil marks, water lines, dates, and measurements taken during the flood 15 years earlier. Linda stood when Frank unrolled it. That was on our kitchen table for a week, she said. Wesley touched the edge of the paper. He remembered Linda bringing sandwiches to exhausted road crews. He remembered Frank knee-deep in mud. He remembered Ethan, younger then, standing at the edge of the washed-out road with his hands in his pockets, saying he wanted to build things that lasted. The memory hit without warning, not as sweetness. As evidence of a different son, Wesley stepped back from the table. Linda noticed. She did not speak. She only moved closer and stood beside him until the moment passed. By late afternoon, Rachel made him rehearse. Wesley hated rehearsing. I know what I know, he said. And if Grant Voss interrupts you? Rachel asked. I keep talking. If Meredith says this is a family matter, it isn't only a family matter. If Ethan looks like he is drowning. Wesley stopped. The room went quiet. Rachel did not soften the question. She waited. Wesley looked at the maps, the folders, the old flood markings. If he is drowning, he said slowly, I do not let him pull his mother under. To save himself. Linda lowered her eyes. Frank turned away toward the coffee pot, though his cup was already full. Rachel nodded once. That is the sentence you remember. Not for the meeting. For yourself. The county meeting was held the next day in a room that had seen too many disagreements and too little fresh paint. Folding chairs lined the back wall. A long table faced the audience, where 3 county officials sat with nameplates, water bottles, and microphones that crackled whenever anyone touched them. The flag stood in one corner. A framed landscape photograph hung crooked near the door. Fluorescent lights flattened every face in the room. Wesley and Linda arrived with Rachel, Claire, and Frank 15 minutes early. Grant Voss was already there. He stood near the aisle speaking with 2 men in dark coats Wesley did not recognize. Grant wore a charcoal suit and a pale blue tie, polished as ever, but his smile narrowed when he saw Rachel. Ethan sat in the 3rd row. Alone. He looked worse than he had at Thanksgiving. His beard had gone rough at the jaw, and his eyes were shadowed. He saw Wesley, then Linda, then looked down at his hands. Meredith sat 2 seats away from him, not beside him. She wore a cream-colored coat and held a leather folder on her lap. Her posture was straight, but Wesley could see the tightness around her mouth. Linda saw it too. She's scared, Linda whispered. Wesley did not answer. Fear had brought them all here in different ways. A county planner named Mara Ellison opened the meeting. She was a woman in her 40s with short brown hair, practical glasses, and the controlled patience of someone accustomed to people treating procedure as an obstacle rather than a safeguard. Beside her sat Tom Alvarez, a water resources specialist with a weathered face and rolled-up sleeves under his county vest, and Judith Kane, a commissioner with white hair cut close to her head and an expression that suggested she had survived both politics and cattle ranchers. Mara explained that the meeting concerned a preliminary development inquiry for parcels associated with Hartman Lake Road, including access feasibility, environmental constraints, and title limitations. Grant stood first. His voice was smooth, respectful, and designed for rooms like this. He spoke about responsible planning, aging landowners, economic opportunity, potential tax benefits, and the need to evaluate options before making assumptions. He did not say resort. He did not say subdivision. He said residential recreational use. He said low-impact development. He said family transition. Wesley felt Linda stiffen beside him at that phrase. Family transition. It sounded cleaner than what it was. When Grant sat down, Meredith rose unexpectedly. "May I say something?" Rachel leaned slightly toward Wesley but did not stop her. Mara nodded. Meredith faced the officials, not her parents. "I want the record to show that this process was begun out of concern for my parents' future. My brother and I have been trying to prevent a crisis, not create one. The property is large, remote, expensive to maintain, and increasingly risky for people in their late 60s. Late 60s. Wesley almost smiled at the insult hidden inside accuracy. Meredith continued. "We are not asking for final approval today. We are asking that the family be allowed to explore options without emotional interference." Linda's hand moved once in her lap. Wesley wanted to look at her, but he kept his eyes forward. Rachel wrote something on her pad. Then she stood. "My clients are not here to prevent review," she said. "They are here to correct the premise under which this review was initiated." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. She introduced the recorded conservation easement, the title packet summary that had minimized it, and the questionable electronic authorization used to initiate access and survey activities. Claire handed copies to the clerk. Mara Ellison's expression changed slightly as she read. Tom Alvarez leaned over to look at the map Rachel placed before him. Grant stood. "With respect, this is premature. No transfer has occurred. No sale contract exists. These are preliminary documents." Rachel turned toward him. "Exactly. And preliminary documents are where misrepresentation does the most work, because everyone assumes harm has not happened yet." A low murmur moved through the room. Judith Kane tapped her microphone. It screeched. Everyone winced. "Let's keep this orderly," she said. Mara looked toward Wesley. "Mr. Hartman, you asked to speak regarding land conditions?" Wesley stood. For a moment, the room seemed too bright. He felt every year in his knees, every sleepless hour behind his eyes, every word on the wall back at the mill. Pattern, intent, pressure, provision. "After I'm gone." Then he looked at the map, and the room steadied. "I'm not here to talk about whether I'm old," he said. "I am. So are most bridges worth preserving." A few people shifted. Someone in the back gave a quiet cough that might have been a laugh. Wesley placed Frank's flood map on the display board. "I worked county roads and bridges for 41 years. I know this land because I've watched water move across it when everybody else was looking at the lake view." He pointed to the lower meadow. In 2009, this field held overflow that would have gone straight across County Road 6. These cottonwoods here hold the bank. The marsh on the east edge filters runoff before it enters Hartman Lake. If you widen the access road here without proper drainage, you don't improve access. You create a chute. Tom Alvarez stood and came closer to the map. Wesley continued. He did not look at Ethan. He did not look at Meredith. He did not look at Grant. He spoke to the land. He spoke about slope and runoff, frost heave and culverts, soil saturation and flood memory. He spoke in plain words, but not small ones. Every sentence carried the weight of having stood in mud, measured damage, and watched land do the quiet work people only noticed after it failed. By the time he finished, the room had changed. Not dramatically, not with applause, but the air had shifted from family dispute to public consequence. Tom Alvarez cleared his throat. "I'd like to add something," he said. Mara nodded. Tom pulled a county layer map from his folder and placed it beside Wesley's flood map. "Our office did a preliminary screen after the inquiry came in. There are two concerns. First, the eastern wetland margin appears to connect to a protected groundwater recharge area. Second, the shoreline habitat has seasonal nesting records for western grebes." Grant's expression tightened. Tom continued. "That does not automatically prohibit all activity, but any development proposal beyond existing residential use would require environmental review, hydrology analysis, habitat survey timing, and likely state consultation. That process would not be quick." Rachel sat very still. Claire's pencil stopped moving. Wesley heard Ethan exhale from the third row. Grant stood again. "With respect, preliminary habitat records are often outdated. A modern environmental consultant may determine—" Tom looked at him. "That is why we require review." The sentence was simple. It landed hard. Mara turned to the title packet again. "And the easement?" Rachel answered. "Recorded. Active. Held by Bitterroot Watershed Conservancy. We have notified them." Judith Kane leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Delaney," she said, looking over her glasses, "you are named in this memorandum as a trustee contact?" Frank looked like he would rather be under a truck in January. But he stood. "Yes, ma'am. Were you aware the Hartmans intended this property to remain protected?" Frank held his cap in both hands. "I was aware because I was there when the flood showed us why it mattered." He sat down immediately after saying it. That was all. But it was enough. Meredith stood again, her voice sharper now. "This is becoming one-sided. My parents are being influenced by outsiders." Linda stood before Wesley could stop her. The room went quiet in a different way. Linda did not have documents in her hand. She did not walk to the map. She did not raise her voice. "My husband and I slept in the same house for 38 years, she said. "We signed the easement together. We paid the taxes together. We planted the windbreak together. We buried 2 dogs near that fence line together. No one in this room gave us our minds." Meredith's face flushed. Linda looked at her daughter, not unkindly, and that somehow made it worse. Concern does not require a forged beginning. No one moved. Ethan lowered his head. Grant looked toward the officials instead of Meredith. Mara Ellison took off her glasses and set them on the table. "Given the recorded easement, the authorization concerns, and environmental constraints, this office will not advance any preliminary development review without direct confirmation from the property owners, the easement holder, and a title insurer willing to address these restrictions." Grant's smile had disappeared. Judith added, "And I would strongly advise all parties to preserve records related to authorization and representations made to this office." Rachel did not look at Wesley, but he knew. The preservation letter had become more than a warning. It had become the direction of the room. The meeting ended without ceremony. People stood, gathered papers, avoided eyes. The 2 men who had come with Grant left quickly. Meredith remained by her chair, gripping her folder. Ethan sat as if standing required more strength than he had left. Wesley walked past his son. For one moment, Ethan looked up. There was pleading in his face. Not for forgiveness. For rescue. Wesley stopped just long enough to feel the old father in him rise like instinct. Then he remembered Linda's sentence from Rachel's office. "If he is drowning, I do not let him pull his mother under to save himself." Wesley gave his son a small nod. Not warmth, not rejection, a line. Then he walked out with Linda. Outside, the afternoon air was cold and clear. The sky had opened after days of gray, and the mountains beyond town stood blue against the light. Frank came out behind them, followed by Claire and Rachel. No one celebrated. There was nothing to celebrate yet. A project had not ended. A wound had not healed. A family had not been repaired. But something important had happened in that Plain County room. The story had stopped being about whether 2 old people were being difficult. It had become about whether a protected piece of land could be pushed through a machine by pretending its owners had already stepped aside. Rachel buttoned her coat. "This slows them down hard," she said. "Stops them?" Frank asked. "No," Rachel said. "But it makes the shortcut expensive." Wesley looked toward the courthouse doors. Grant had come out and was speaking into his phone, one hand cutting the air in tight, angry motions. Meredith stood near him, but not with him. Ethan remained inside. Linda slipped her hand into Wesley's. Her hand was warmer than it had been in Nora's garage. Wesley looked at her. "You did well," he said. "So did the land," she answered. They stood there together for a moment, not as people who had won, but as people who had finally made the truth stand where others had to see it. When they returned to the mill, Wesley did not add another word to the wall. For the first time, he did not need to. The words already there had followed them into the county room and done their work. The first email arrived before breakfast. Wesley was standing beside the mill office window, watching frost lift slowly from the lumber stacks, when Rachel Pierce's phone buzzed on the metal desk. She had arrived early, as if sleep had been optional for everyone involved in the Hartman matter. Claire sat with her red glasses low on her nose, reviewing copies of the county meeting notes. Frank was outside somewhere, pretending to check the same roof he had checked 3 times already. Rachel read the email once. Then she read it again. Linda looked up from the couch. "Bad?" Rachel set the phone down. "Not bad." Wesley waited. "The title company is declining to insure any transfer tied to the proposed development until the conservation easement, authorization chain, and trustee provision are resolved." The room did not erupt. No one cheered. Wesley only closed his eyes for a moment. For days, every piece of news had been another door opening beneath his feet. This was the first one that closed in front of someone else. Linda exhaled slowly. Claire leaned back in her chair. A title company with a sudden interest in survival. Always refreshing. Rachel's phone buzzed again. She lifted it, read, and gave a short nod. "And Western Valley Bank is suspending review of any financing associated with the development inquiry. They cite title uncertainty, environmental review exposure, and disputed authorization." Frank entered just in time to hear the last part. "Well," he said, wiping his hands on a rag, "that sounds like a banker stepping away from a burning stove." "It does," Rachel said. Wesley looked at the wall. "Pattern. Intent. Pressure. Provision. After I'm gone." Those words had carried them through the county meeting. Now the world outside the mill was beginning to answer back. But the answer did not feel like victory. It felt like damage being inventoried. By noon, Rachel confirmed what they already suspected. The investors behind Grant Voss had paused their involvement. Not canceled. Not confessed. Paused. It was the kind of word men used when they wanted to retreat without admitting they had run. Grant sent no apology. Instead, he sent a carefully phrased message to Rachel, claiming that his office had relied on representations provided by family members and third-party document vendors. He denied any intent to mislead. He expressed concern over miscommunication. He invited all parties to resolve matters privately. Claire read the message at the desk, her mouth flattening with every line. "Miscommunication," she said. "The preferred perfume of people standing near fraud." Linda did not smile. "What about the insurance form?" she asked. Rachel's expression softened, just slightly. "I spoke with the insurer's legal department. The beneficiary change was submitted but not fully processed. They flagged an inconsistency in verification and held it for review." Wesley turned toward her. "So Linda is still primary?" "Yes." Linda looked down at her hands. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "They tried." No one corrected her with technical language. Submitted but not fully processed. Flagged for review. Held pending verification. Those phrases mattered legally, but emotionally, Linda had named the thing correctly. They tried. That afternoon, Ethan called 3 times. Wesley did not answer. Meredith sent one text message. "Mom, please don't let Dad make irreversible decisions while he's upset." Linda read it twice, then placed the phone face down on the desk. Wesley saw her hand tremble. "Do you want to respond?" he asked. "No." She looked at the wall. "She still thinks the danger is your emotion." Wesley sat beside her. "And what do you think the danger is?" Linda's eyes stayed on the words, People who can call themselves reasonable while removing someone else's choices. Wesley took that in. It was a sentence he could never have written himself. Too clean. Too painful. Too true. By evening, Rachel laid out the options. They were all seated around the work table. The old flood map remained rolled in the corner. Arthur Bellamy's memorandum lay in a protective folder near Wesley's elbow. Frank sat with his arms crossed, silent for once. Claire had a legal pad open, but was not writing. "You can hold position," Rachel said. "Keep ownership as is. Notify all parties that no development authorization exists, and pursue remedies for the electronic signature and related conduct." Wesley nodded. Or you can activate the trustee provision and begin transferring the protected portion into a conservation structure with stronger independent oversight. It would not be instant. It would require coordination with the Conservancy, county review, and careful drafting. But it would remove the land from being treated as family liquidity. Linda looked at Wesley. There it was. The decision everyone thought this fight had been about. Keep it, or protect it from being kept for the wrong reason. Frank leaned forward. "You don't have to decide tonight." Wesley looked at his friend. That was kind, but not true. Some decisions were not made in a single hour, but they had been forming inside a man for years. Wesley had begun deciding this during the flood, before Ethan needed money, before Meredith learned to speak in financial phrases, before Grant Voss ever looked through the dining room window and saw acreage instead of home. He looked at Linda. "What do you want?" She did not answer quickly. "I want our house," she said at last. "The garden. The path to the lake. The porch in the morning. I want enough land around us that I don't feel like strangers are breathing through the walls." Wesley nodded. "And the rest?" Linda's eyes filled, but her voice held. "I don't want our children waiting for us to die so they can argue over what we meant." The sentence settled over the room. Frank looked away. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Rachel did not move. Wesley reached across the table and placed his hand over Linda's. "Neither do I." The next week moved with the dull force of machinery. Rachel drafted notices. The Bitterroot Watershed Conservancy sent 2 representatives to review the easement and Arthur's memorandum. One was a young attorney who spoke too quickly when nervous. The other was an older field director named Graham Sutter, a broad-shouldered man with sun-damaged skin and the patient eyes of someone who had spent more time listening to water than to committees. Graham walked the lower meadow with Wesley and Frank. He did not talk much. He knelt once near the marsh edge, rubbed soil between his fingers, and looked toward the lake. "Still doing its job," he said. Wesley liked him immediately. Together with Rachel, the Conservancy began outlining a structure. Wesley and Linda would keep the home site, garden, old barn, and defined residential acreage. The protected meadow, shoreline buffer, marsh edge, and access-sensitive parcels would move under a community conservation trust with independent oversight. Frank would serve as interim trustee until a formal board was seated. Claire agreed to help organize the historical file so future decision-makers could not pretend the record was unclear. When Rachel explained the structure, Wesley listened carefully. It was not simple. It was not sentimental. It was durable. That mattered more. The hardest part came when Rachel asked whether Ethan and Meredith should be notified before the filings moved forward. Legally, they were not required to approve. Morally, the question still entered the room and stood there like a person. Linda said nothing. Frank found sudden interest in the stove. Claire looked at Wesley over her glasses. Rachel waited. Wesley looked at the wall one last time. Then he said, "Notify them. Do not ask permission." The letters went out on a Thursday. Meredith called within an hour. Linda answered. Wesley watched from across the office as his wife listened. He could not hear Meredith's words. Only the thin urgency of her voice through the receiver. Linda's face remained calm. "No," she said once. Then later, "Because your father and I are still alive." A long silence followed. Linda closed her eyes. "I love you, Meredith. That is not the same as letting you manage me." She hung up without waiting for permission to end the conversation. Wesley looked at her. She set the phone down carefully, as if it were sharp. "That was harder than the county meeting," she said. "I know," she cried. "I'm sorry." "Sorry." But Linda did not pick the phone back up. Ethan did not call. For 2 days, he disappeared into silence. Wesley told himself he was grateful. He was not. On the third evening, as the last orange light was leaving the mill yard, a truck pulled in near the office. Wesley knew the engine before Frank looked out the window. Ethan stepped out alone. He looked thinner than he had at the county meeting. His coat hung open despite the cold, and he carried a white envelope in one hand. He stood beside the truck for a long moment before walking to the door. Frank opened it before he knocked. "Evening," Frank said. Ethan swallowed. "Is my father here?" Frank looked back at Wesley. Wesley stood. Linda remained seated, but her body had gone very still. Ethan stepped inside. He did not look at the wall at first. Then he did. His eyes moved over the words. Pattern. Temps. Pressure. Provision. After I'm gone. His face changed at the last line. "That's Mom's handwriting," he said. No one answered. Ethan looked at Linda then. Whatever speech he had prepared seemed to lose its shape. "Mom," he said. Linda folded her hands in her lap. "Ethan." He looked at Wesley and held out the envelope. "I gave this to Rachel too. It's a statement about the electronic authorization, about what Grant told me, about what I allowed." Wesley did not take it immediately. "Allowed," he said. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he did not defend himself. "Yes." Wesley took the envelope. It was unsealed. Inside was a printed statement with Ethan's signature at the bottom. Wesley read the first page standing. Ethan admitted he had forwarded access credentials and approved the use of an electronic authorization process after Grant assured him it was only for preliminary review. He admitted he did not confirm consent directly with Wesley. He admitted he knew his father had not personally signed the form before the survey crew was scheduled. He did not blame Meredith. He did not fully blame Grant. For once, the document did not hide behind clean language. Wesley lowered the page. "Why now?" Ethan looked toward Linda before answering. "Because at the meeting, Mom said concern doesn't need a forged beginning." Linda looked down. Ethan's voice broke slightly. "I heard it." For a moment, he looked like the boy from the flood map memory, standing by a washed-out road, trying to understand how things failed. "I was scared," Ethan said. "The lawsuit, the insurance, payroll, everything. Grant made it sound like I was being practical. Meredith made it sound like you were being stubborn. I let myself believe both because it was easier than saying I was drowning." Wesley felt the old instinct again. The father instinct. The one that wanted to step forward, take the weight, fix the mistake, save the son. But some rescues taught a man nothing except where to find the next handout. "What happens to your company?" Wesley asked. Ethan looked away. "I don't know." "And if I gave you money?" Linda looked at Wesley sharply, but he kept his eyes on Ethan. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. The room held its breath. Finally, Ethan said, "I'd probably still be the man who let them use your name." That answer did more to him than an apology would have. Wesley looked at the paper again. "You want forgiveness?" Ethan's eyes filled. "Yes." Wesley nodded slowly. "I know." The two words landed harder than refusal. Ethan wiped his face with the heel of one hand, angry at the tears. Wesley folded the statement and placed it back in the envelope. "I'm not ready to give you what you want." Ethan nodded, almost desperately. "I understand." "No," Wesley said. "You don't yet, but you might." Linda stood then. Ethan looked at her as if bracing for something worse than anger. She walked to him, stopped an arm's length away, and studied his face. Her own son's face. Older now. Frightened. Responsible for more pain than he could repair in one visit. "I am your mother," she said. "Not a future distribution." Ethan closed his eyes. "I know. Learn it." He nodded. She did not hug him, but when he turned to leave, she said, "Drive slow. The lower road freezes before the bridge." Ethan stopped with his hand on the door. That small sentence nearly undid him. It nearly undid Wesley, too. Then Ethan stepped outside. Frank watched his truck disappear. No one spoke for a long time. The trust documents were signed 2 weeks later in Rachel's office. There was no ceremony, though Claire brought a pen she said wrote better than most people testified. Frank signed his trustee acknowledgement with the pained expression of a man accepting responsibility he had never asked for but would not abandon. Linda signed beside Wesley, her hand steady. Wesley paused before writing his name. Not because he doubted, because he understood. For years he had thought inheritance meant leaving something to your children. Now he knew there were times when love meant leaving something beyond their reach until they learned not to ruin it. He signed. Outside Rachel's office window, the first real snow of the season began to fall. A year later, the house by the lake was quieter. Not empty, quiet. Linda planted wildflowers along the path in spring and marked the first grebe nest sighting on a calendar Graham Sutter had given her. Frank still came by on Saturday mornings, complaining about the coffee and drinking 3 cups. Claire mailed copies of properly labeled documents in envelopes so stern they looked capable of suing someone on their own. Meredith called once a month. Sometimes Linda answered. Sometimes she did not. Ethan wrote letters. Not often. Not beautifully. But honestly. He was selling off equipment, facing the lawsuit, trying to settle what could be settled without using his parents as collateral. Wesley read every letter and kept them in a drawer. He did not always reply. One November morning, close to Thanksgiving, Wesley stood on the porch and watched mist lift off the lake. The protected meadow lay pale under frost. The cottonwoods stood bare and stubborn along the bank. Beyond them, the land no longer felt like a prize waiting for someone's crisis. It felt like what it had always been. Work, memory, shelter, duty. Linda came out with 2 mugs of coffee and handed him one. "You thinking about last year?" she asked. "Yes." "Regret anything?" Wesley looked toward the lower meadow, where the morning light touched the frost until it shone like scattered glass. "I regret that it had to be protected from our own." Linda stood beside him. After a while, she said, "But it was protected." He nodded. Behind them, the house creaked softly in the cold, still speaking its old winter language. This time, it did not sound like a witness. It sounded like home. Wesley took Linda's hand. Some signatures tried to steal a life before it was finished. But some signatures, made slowly and with a clear mind, could give a life back its shape. And this time, Wesley's name was his own. Sometimes justice does not arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, through one honest signature, one protected piece of land, and one person brave enough to say, "This is still my life." Wesley and Linda did not win because they kept everything. They won because they refused to let fear, greed, or even family pressure decide what their years had meant. In our own lives, may we remember this. Peace is not always found in getting back what was taken. Sometimes peace begins when we finally stop letting others misuse what we built with love. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to protect something precious with quiet strength? And if you'd like more stories of family, dignity, and quiet justice, please subscribe and stay with us. May your home be filled with wisdom, courage, and peace.